Hello team, welcome back to another Line War cast. This is your map today in a 1v1 in blue Notorious Nubs and in red Crimson Giant. This is the most recently released version of Line War, version 36. It's on the main branch now. Check out the Line War Discord for more information. And let's get into it. So Crimson and Nubs are both spawning in kind of the top part of this map. Two immediate towns for blue and a factory follow-up. Two factories, in fact. Here comes the third factory. And two airports for Crimson. Crimson has this gas already controlled by the starting location where they spawned. A town pre-built with the pre-built construction money. That's why the two airports in the town show up immediately. And then a factory and a barracks as a follow-up. It's tanks out of the first factory for Nubs. And it'll be interesting to see if Nubs continues to go for more tanks out of these other two factories. If that's the case, then Nubs is going to have to secure at least one of these oils. There's actually a bunch of them kind of between the two players here, and there's one in the mountain range, but it'll take a while for Nubs to get there. And generally we see tank openers combined with a little bit of a rush play, in that you want to identify where your opponent's gas is and then just drive the tanks there as quick as possible or some other high value target to try to take it out. Tanks are very good at those hit and run situations, getting behind the front lines and causing havoc. It's two bombers for Crimson, who's going for SAMs with the factory. I feel like in this current meta at the moment, where we're seeing a lot more bomber interceptor play, this could be a strong start with the bombers and then immediately with the SAMs to deal with any interceptors that your opponent might have. And Nubs, or pardon me, Crimson Giant is going for a second barracks behind this. This is what Nubs' vision is, so Crimson also won't know where exactly blue has spawned quite yet. And the answer to our question is that it's actually three factories all going tanks for blue off of this two-town opener, which makes me think that blue is going to have a little bit more of economy to start off the game. If we check the income, it's 450 for blue, 395 for red. And a gas in the back actually for Nubs. I didn't even see this. So this is going to be a very safe gas for blue to mount what could be a very strong tank attack. Two of the factories are still going for tanks. One of the factories has switched to SAMs. The SAMs can do decent against the bombers. They can't shoot their machine gun. They can only use their surface-to-air missile. And the machine gun that the SAM uses is actually the thing that does the most DPS. What I think happened here, maybe, is that Crimson went to send out these bombers to the south to kind of check where Nubs is. And then, in that time, the fog of war changed, and then both players know where the other one is at this point. So the bombers will come home, they'll get ready to start launching an attack forward. This is one of the problems, is that Crimson has to take this gas now. There's one off to the right, but it'll take a while to get there. And for a tank opener, this, unfortunately for red, is a very dangerous gas, because of the ability of the tanks to just roll on by this infantry and get on top of it. Two of these factories are now going for SAMs for Nubs. One of the SAMs is already done, so it'll be 3 SAMs by the time these bombers show up. And Nubs is going for another barracks. And here comes the bombers' attempt to stop these tanks, or at least soften them up before the tanks get on top of the energy. These bombs will always hit their target. There's no such thing as a miss. The only unit in Line War that can miss is a rocket that you launch. And this is exactly the plan. It'll be a very tense situation for red here to make sure that this refinery doesn't go down. When I play, sometimes I underestimate tanks. If they do get on top of it, they can kill it relatively quickly. Great body block by Crimson on this tank, and obviously cleaning up the other one that was part of it. And these two tanks are very damaged. They might not get this refinery, but if they do, it's going to be a big problem for red. So right now, Crimson's able to stave it off for a little bit. Nubs is digging in SAMs in this mountain range, so there will be a little bit of a stealth bonus to these SAMs. The bombers won't be able to see them immediately. And here comes an airport for Nubs. It'll be very interesting to see if this is interceptors from blue, or if Nubs will go for bombers themselves. Still bomber production out of Crimson, who continues to go for SAMs out of this factory. And there's no other production anywhere else on the map beside the two players' starting spots. And it's actually a switch into all SAMs for Nubs at the moment. Probably it's these bombers are very scary. I mean, if Crimson can... Rather, if Crimson did send the bombers over towards Nubs' main base and there wasn't these SAMs here, Nubs could quickly start losing a bunch of these buildings, and that's a big deal. Income-wise, 580 for blue, 525 for red. So this two-town start really showing how much money it can make. And Crimson's starting to get this territory, likely going to start setting up this trade route, which is pretty much controlled. Rather, the territories that those two trade routes need are almost taken for red. We see that fourth factory follow-up for Nubs. The bombers are going to notice that there's a bunch of SAMs. We see that it's just the missiles that are getting shot. The SAMs will target the most damaged planes, so they do take out one of the bombers, which is great for blue. And after enough of these SAMs are created for Nubs, we'll likely either see a transition back into tanks, or even potentially artillery. But I wouldn't expect that this is just straight up SAM for the rest of the game out of these factories. It's interceptors out of the airport for Nubs, which will have to do a good job to try to get away from these SAMs that Crimson has positioned. And this is the play. Crimson's going for this town, which is connected to this other town via this port. And the infantry start heading back up to make sure that territory is actually controlled. Nubs is at the far right at this point. These infantry aren't even capping. They're just retreat or move commanding to this mountain range. Probably going to build a proxy base there. And second factory on the way for Crimson. So it's 2 factories against what is going to be 5 factories for blue. But Crimson will have the aircraft advantage because of these 2 airports. Nubs is definitely controlling this mountain range first. And here come the bombers potentially to try to attack into the mountains, and that's what they're doing. This is the dot command for the bombers for Crimson. And you can see the vision. As these infantry are in the mountains and the forest, they get the stealth bonus. Bombers don't have the best detection, but in this number of... when it's this many bombers, it's a cumulative effect on the vision. And so they are starting to spot these infantry now, taking out a few of them, which over time kind of stops how much income Nubs is easily making, because all this capping infantry is now kind of reset, and these folks have to get down south to start making progress again. First interceptor is done for Nubs. It's on the airport. Second interceptor on the way. And here's this switch back into tanks. This is still a very exposed gas at the moment for Crimson, who has a choice to make to either go for more eco at this point in time or to get a second gas somewhere on the map in case this one does fall. With 5 factories, 4 of which producing tanks, blue is going to get a bunch of tanks relatively quickly. And the beep beep we hear is that red is slowly getting out of gas. These bombers take a decent amount of energy. Artillery and infantry for red, taking on a tank. If the tanks are able to get on top of the artillery won't have a good time. Tanks by themselves can take on this much infantry. And a decent amount of infantry just in general. So it's really going to be a question of whether red can fend off these tanks with just bombers, and a handful of infantry and artillery, which will potentially be tough to do. We can see the progress that Nubs is making on the left side of the map, building another barracks that'll produce a bunch of capping infantry, which will get blue ahead economically over time. Tanks on top of their artillery. This is just how quick they're able to dispatch of this. The SAMs are backing off into the forest, because if the SAMs take on the tanks, the mini tanks take on the big tanks. Almost said mini tanks tank on the big tanks. It won't be good for the SAMs. An income check, 710 for blue at this point, 735 for red, so Crimson is making money. It's the second town coming on, well, rather the third town in total. And if Crimson can get this trade route up, that would be a big win for red. It's now 7 tanks with 4 more on the way. Nubs only has this one energy source in this refinery in the back, though, so over time, like this many tanks when they're moving, it's gonna take a lot of energy to keep these things rolling, especially if these interceptors decide to fly out. The interceptors can kind of cover these infantry, and we see the idea that Crimson is continuing to use the bombers to stop this infantry from capping further down the left-hand side of the map. Barracks in the top right for Nubs, that might be commandos or just more infantry. And it looks like, yeah, this is what's about to happen, is that Nubs is going to just move command through this forest and head right towards the gas. 5 tanks here could take on this many units. The bombers are off to the left, destroying the infantry, but they're not at home to be able to deal with these tanks. And if this one gas goes down, then all the bombers have to stop moving. So a very tense moment for red at this point. Helicopters out of the airport at this point for blue after the 3 interceptors are done. I mean, 3 interceptors is a decent amount to deal with this many bombers. And you can just see how quick the time to kill is when the tanks are on top of the refinery. This is most certainly going to make these bombers go home, and that's what happens with the black plumes of smoke. And even if Nubs were to lose all of these tanks, I think it's pretty much worth it, because there's just so many more tanks that are able to show up here. And the biggest asset that Crimson really had with all the bombers, there's no real ETA on when they can move. I guess there's this gas, but it's not a very comfortable thing to take if you're red because of this blue army in the top right. 1 tank taking on 5 or 6 infantry, I can count. And gets 2 of them and then is dispatched. And now a transition into artillery. You can see the gas, the energy usage for Nubs relatively high with this many tanks. Artillery does not use energy, so it makes sense that this is the transition. And Crimson has actually done a decent job to get some of the territories on the left, which slows down how quickly Nubs can move down the west side of the map there. We can kind of get an idea of what sort of trades that tanks get on top of artillery. Helicopter taking on some red infantry in the top, that's definitely going to be cleared up. Blue also has the defender's advantage with all this artillery, since it shows up and is pretty much immediately in the fight. And 5 factories is an enormous investment for blue, and will certainly be able to start outproducing Crimson, since it's a deficit of 3 factories that red has. This is the play for Crimson to get this gas in the mountains, taking that oil well. And it's a very quick and aggressive port from Crimson, which is probably the greedy play in this situation, but it's hard not to like that. If you can get up a trade route on your opponent, it's a lot of money. This Commando is scouting where the airports are, which will allow these tanks to roll by these SAMs. I assume that this is Nub's view, and I assume that Blue is going to take out this barracks and then immediately head over here. The gas is done now. The refinery is up and running, so the bombers can take off again. Crimson putting down another factory. And Blue has got rid of most of the infantry. There's one left in the bottom left for Red. This is a relatively large fight in the forest, but this Red Army might get surrounded a little bit. One of the changes that has happened in this patch, this most recent release, is that infantry do much better in forests. The bonus that they have was increased from 10% armor buff and attack buff to a 20% armor buff and attack buff, pardon me. So if this red artillery just kind of gets stuck in the forest with some blue infantry, which might not be the case, but they would get wiped relatively quickly. The numbers for blue are pretty overwhelming. And here comes a pipeline with a depot for Nubs off of these two refineries. So any tanks that Nubs does build, and this is the switch into a 5-factory tank, should be fine. Because that's going to be a lot of energy and a lot of energy stored up. This proxy base in the top right with these commandos is actually a kind of cool idea. I mean, it allows these blue commandos to just use this open field to start scouting different things. Makes it certain that Crimson can't push the top right without dealing with this barracks. First merchant ships are doing their thing, about to make Red a bunch of money. But this is going to be a very strong push from Nubs in a second. This army is going to just continue to push forward. And I think at this point, Crimson would have to just essentially turtle and make sure that this base doesn't fall and allow this trade route to generate more income. 910 income for blue, 961 for red. It's very close. Turtling, of course, has the unfortunate effect of your units aren't moving at all, while your opponent's units are getting value by taking territories. So it's not like it's the correct play for Crimson to dig in or anything in this situation. It's just going to be very difficult to survive this next attack. But Nubs is getting a bunch of economy on the left. There's 2 barracks in the bottom for Crimson. That's great. And a very safe refinery in the bottom right of the map. Great play from the bombers to destroy that barracks, so there's no more commandos coming from a sneaky location. But we'll see if 5 tanks can take on what is going to be about 6 artillery pieces. There's the defender's advantage for red, in that all these buildings, like when they make a unit, they're immediately in the fight. But the time to kill for tanks is just super quick. If the tanks are just clicking on this airport, which it looks like they are, as soon as these bombers land, the ones that are on the airport are just going to explode. And this is tense. If the 2 airports go down, this game is certainly over. If one of them does, it's a little bit more of a maybe situation. So these 2 bombers explode in the air because they can't land anywhere. There's no more room on this airport since it's full. And you can hear more tanks rolling in. Even if these 2 tanks don't destroy the airport, these ones are going to do pretty big damage to any of the other producers, since red is over here close to the airport to defend it, which is the right call. Rather, I think it's the right call. The airport's very important to keep alive. Bombers working on those tanks, but the tanks are there and have enough of a head start on that factory that they're going to be able to destroy it. Let's check the econ. 1050 for blue, 1064 for red. There's a chance that Crimson, since they have more barracks in the bottom, could mount a army here, then push up the left side, which would be very important to start destroying some of Blue's income, taking away all that territory on the left-hand side. And that's a little bit tough that that one bomber got last hit by the SAM. Great flank from Nubs. Tanks, I mean, it must have been pretty much one shot, because I don't even think this tank visually shot that airport and just exploded. Tank just rolled too close to the airport and it just totally disappeared. And it's still just 5 factories pumping tanks for Nubs. And Nubs has the gas to do this, has the energy required to keep these tanks moving. These 3 tanks are either... they must be going towards this town. Yeah, so Nubs does see this port. The town isn't spotted because it's in the forest, and the forest gives a little bit of a visibility buff. Rather like stealth bonus to buildings that are made in forests and mountains. And here comes the tanks again. So even if all these tanks die, what it really does is it allows them to tank, pun intended, for the artillery pieces for Blue. Since all this red artillery is focusing on the tanks, they're not focusing on these artillery pieces. Blue artillery is going to be able to deploy. It's a good amount of SAMs for Crimson, which can deal with this number of helicopters. But it's very, I mean, it's a huge part of the game in that Red has no more bombers left. Which was a big advantage. The first round of tanks for Blue are about to get cleared up, but here comes that second round of tanks. The third round is just leaving the base now. All these factories are relatively in sync. So it'll just be wave of tank attacks to what I suspect will be the end of the game. Firecrackers for the SAMs, great positioning from Crimson on them. We'll get another helicopter. And actually, so far, a pretty decent defense for Crimson. Now the barracks start falling, and the arc favors Blue here a little bit more, I think. The concave. But majorly, it's just the fact that there's tanks against that artillery. Nub's building a town in the bottom left. Unfortunately for Crimson, Blue does win the fight there. And we'll be able to continue pushing. So many SAMs from Nubs aren't really all that useful anymore because the bombers are gone. But they're in a perfect position just in case Crimson did have a airport to the south. And income-wise, 1190 for Blue, 1033 for Red. But we saw that Blue was making that town in the bottom left in this little lake. And building this town as well, so there's going to be a trade route for the Nubs that will slowly get set up. 2 infantry just digging in this random location on the mountains. Actually, Crimson's territory. And here come these 3 factories super close. At this point, the intent is very clear that Nubs is pushing to end the game. And is really gonna kind of just buy this victory by putting down all of these factories. It's about 900 income worth of factories right here. Pretty much on Crimson's territory. All things considered, still a very good defense for Crimson, given how many artillery and tanks were here. But every one of these buildings that goes down for Red puts them further and further behind. Another wave of tanks, and that's the game. GG, well played. It's cool to see that interaction between tanks and bombers in this new release. Very close game. And if I had to guess, this is probably where the airports got destroyed. For Crimson. GG. Folks, I hope you enjoyed it. Check out the Line War Discord if you'd like to learn more about the game, chat about stuff, whatever it is. Check out Twitch. I stream on there, twitch.tv/SodaQuackers, same name as YouTube. Hope you have a wonderful night, day, evening, whatever it is. Tournament is March 20th to 26th. Again, Line War Discord for more details. Very exciting. We'll see you around. Good luck, have fun on ladder. Peace.